You're listening to the only MMA radio show in Ithaca, Shadowboxing, with your host, Dan Doherty, only on VIC Radio, Ithaca. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Shadowboxing. I am your host, Dan Doherty. This week again, no UFC action last night, but a bunch of news happened during the week, which is always great. Got to take up a lot of time not breaking down fights, so good thing, some big things happened in the world of MMA this week. Biggest thing, of course, is the whole GSP situation. He went on the MMA Hour on Monday with Ariel Helwani and declared that he was a free agent, which is huge. The greatest fighter of all time, the former welterweight champion, gone from the UFC until Zuffa came out and said, or the UFC actually released a statement and said, well, Zuffa is honoring the contract with GSP. GSP should too. So is he a free agent or is he not? Looks like it's going to be a long, drawn-out legal process where GSP won't be able to fight anywhere until it gets settled. So, good luck to him. People were thinking Bellator as the most likely scenario. But I think still the most likely scenario is that he never fights again, which is unfortunate. The UFC had their chance. UFC 206 had GSP written all over it, but they couldn't get it done. They couldn't get him an opponent on time. They tried to get him Robbie Lawler, according to GSP, but Lawler would have been injured or wouldn't have been able to fight at UFC 206. He pulled out of UFC 205 from his fight with Donald Cerrone. So nothing to believe that he would have made it to UFC 206 just a month later. And as a result, GSP's lawyers terminated the contract because the UFC could not get him an opponent in time, or they allegedly terminated the contract, but the UFC is not honoring that termination. So it's going to be a strange little time with a lot of GSP versus UFC news. But it's pretty embarrassing for the UFC to let their star walk. I mean, this was written in the stars just to have Conor McGregor, then GSP, then Ronda Rousey headline pay-per-views, but then they couldn't get the GSP deal done. But they will hold him. They will hold him to in the promotion to make sure he doesn't go off and fight in Bellator or anything. Just like remember how Eddie Alvarez couldn't get to the UFC because Bellator held him up. I expect a similar situation to happen here with GSP and the UFC. They're gonna bombard him with legal issues. It's all contract work. The UFC can afford the best lawyers, so GSP has his work cut out for him. GSP and his lawyers that have worked out arbitration deals and free agency issues before in the past with other sports, with other major sports. So GSP's got the experienced guys on his side, but it's going to take a lot of time to get the UFC off his back. I personally think I think he won't fight. I think he won't fight again. I can't see him fighting anywhere else than the UFC because he's really outspoken on the drug testing issues, and that means the only place that he can really fight is the UFC. USADA has done great things in terms of drug testing in the UFC, and if he goes to Bellator, their drug testing is kind of a joke. So that wouldn't really make sense. They fight on Indian promotions. They try to avoid drug testing and regulations as much as they can. They go overseas sometimes. They make guys fight before they should, after knockouts, or knockdowns, I should say. Matt Mitrione fighting a month after he got brutally knocked down in his fight, in his victory. But you can't fight in Risen, where all the guys are going to be juiced up on steroids also. The new Pride. And 1FC also. Their champion, I forget which Gracie it is, but he's jacked to the gills definitely on steroids, so GSP can't fight there. And yeah, the only option for GSP is the UFC, which is what really gives the UFC the upper hand in this situation. Where else will GSP go? He pushed for strict drug testing, and UFC did that and then some, but they couldn't get GSP a fight. I don't know why what the UFC exactly has against GSP. He's been a big, huge draw for them, and then there was the fight against Johnny Hendricks where he won a controversial decision. Dana White was not very pleased, and then he was even less pleased with GSP's decision to retire after the fight. So maybe, I don't know if they're still holding that against him or what. Apparently, GSP was told that the UFC would have to reintroduce St. Pierre to the new fans, which is kind of ridiculous. He's the greatest fighter of all time, a former champion. You can just look up his highlight reel, really. I mean, Fight Pass is there for a reason. Just, I mean, how much promotion do you have to do? It's Georges St. Pierre. He was always a 1 million plus pay-per-view draw. And he only retired, like 2 or 3 years ago. So, I mean, yeah, that's a pretty ridiculous stance from WME and that stuff. That might just be them covering for the whole sponsorship issue where St. Pierre's contract was signed before Reebok, and he was getting a ton of sponsors. Under Armour, the main one, bringing in over 6 figures in, not even 6, over 7 figures in sponsorship money each event. And now he'll only bring in $20,000 if he challenges for the belt. $15,000, or no, $20,000. Yeah, GSP would bring in $20,000 on the Reebok scale, $30,000 if he challenges for the belt, which is so much less than he would make back in 2013, 2014 when he retired. Which is really unfortunate. And the UFC won't budge. They won't make up that money for GSP, which is, yeah, not good. Not good. It's a bold move for the UFC to almost let him walk, or to not even give him a fight in this in this Canadian card. A weak Canadian card. Sandwich between UFC 205 and UFC 207 and a bunch of other events. And it doesn't really look that great. You got Cormier and Johnson in the main event. Their rematch. Cub Swanson versus Doo Ho Choi, which is awesome, but that's the co-main event. No 2 title fights. They're not stacking the deck on this one. Yeah, this was supposed to be GSP's card. You could tell after they announced Cormier and Johnson, he said, "I'm not the main event," and then you can see on the website that it was to be determined versus to be announced, and they were just waiting for that GSP deal to get done, and then it didn't. A week ago, they changed it to Cormier Johnson in the main event. Then a couple days later, GSP announces he's no longer with the UFC. So what do you do with UFC 206? Jordan Means back. UFC 206, that's cool. He retired for a bit. He's taken a ton of fights. He's only like 28 years old or something. And he's had a ton of fights in his career. So he retired after Thiago Alves beat him with a body kick, and now he'll be fighting Emil Meek in his UFC debut. Meek was supposed to fight a couple months ago in Hamburg, but pulled out or was forced off the card to deal with USADA. No steroids or anything. There was just some medical information he had to deal with, and he had to re-enter the testing pool. And now he's back fighting Jordan Mien, which is great to see. He's one of the best strikers. Mien is an amazing striker and was one of the top prospects in the UFC before retiring at such a young age. So it's really cool to have him back. You got Cub Swanson and Doo Ho Choi, your likely co-main event. And Nikita Krylov, Misha Serkinov, also likely for the main card. Lando Venata's on the card, which is cool. Good to see him back in the cage after his stunning performance against Tony Ferguson. Almost won. He had Ferguson skating around the octagon in the first round with a ton of knockdowns. Now he's fighting John Makdessi. Valerie Letourneau. Valerie Letourneau. Let's say that name correctly, please. Right now, she's listed as the official co-main event, which is strange. She's fighting a debuting Brazilian strawweight, Poliana Botelho. I don't think that can be you got Doo Ho Choi on the card. That's got to be the co-main event. So, yeah, Choi's fourth fight in the UFC. He's fighting the number 4 or 5 fighter in the world, depending on who you are, Cub Swanson. And I love that they're giving him a push. He better be in the co-main event. Love Doo Ho Choi. He's going to be the next champion at featherweight. You heard it here first. Or probably not the first person you've heard it from, but definitely believe it. He's got power. He's got dynamite in his hands. He can knock out just about anybody. And he's so calm and collected in the octagon. So yeah, UFC 206, really, really rough without GSP. That would have been... How awesome would that have been? Just said it before, but McGregor, GSP, Rousey, what a run that would have been for the UFC with a bunch of fight nights sprinkled in. But the big ones, the 3 biggest stars this decade, all fighting in 3 pay-per-views in a row. How crazy would that have been? Just boatloads of money. And now UFC 206 kind of is just going to be a forgotten card. It's just going to seem like another fight night with a championship fight on it. Unfortunate, but hey, UFC's taking a strong stance. And again, I don't see GSP walking, so he will likely retire again or just ride off into the sunset. Yeah, would have loved to see him fight again, but does not seem likely unless the UFC can make a miraculous deal happen where GSP wants to fight for them again. I mean, he does want to fight for them. It's just that the UFC has to want GSP to fight for them. That's the issue. I don't think they do right now for some reason. Other biggest news of the week: Gegard Mousasi versus Uriah Hall, your new main event for UFC Belfast on November 19th. Gunnar Nelson, unfortunately injured, had to pull out of his fight against Dong Young Kim. That would have been a great co-main event. 2 excellent grapplers. And Tumenov, I'm already saying Tumenov, but yeah, Gunnar Nelson's coming off that awesome rear naked choke victory against Albert Tumenov. And that got him back on track after Damian Maia just embarrassed him on the ground. Thought Dong Young Kim made a lot of sense for a matchup with Gunnar Nelson. Kim was supposed to fight Neil Magny at UFC 202, but pulled out of that fight with an injury. And now, if he doesn't get an opponent, if they don't find someone willing to step up on short notice to take on Dong Young Kim, it'll be a year out of the octagon for Stun Gun. Yeah, it's not good. He's one of the more talented guys in the division, but he seems to just get forgotten and did no favors when his original opponent, can't remember who it is at the moment, but he was supposed to fight someone at UFC Seoul, and then they pulled out. It was Josh Berkman, I believe. Just came to me. Yeah, I think Dong Young Kim was supposed to fight Josh Berkman at UFC Seoul, but then Berkman gets injured, and Dominic Steele steps in, and Dong Young Kim just throws him around. No, it wasn't Dominic Steele. It was Dominic Waters. Oh, okay. Yeah, Dominic Waters, and yeah, Dong Young Kim just threw him around in the octagon and TKO'd him first round. But now he's been out for a while now, and yeah, Gunnar Nelson would have been a nice return fight for him. Kim is kind of in the bottom half of the top 10 at welterweight. definitely has the talent to be one of those top contenders. He just needs to fight more. Just needs to fight more. And hopefully have opponents not pull out on him. I do like the new main event, though. Gegard Mousasi called for either Uriah Hall or Anderson Silva, and he got one of them. He's brutally honest now. I like the new Mousasi. He said that I want these guys. They probably won't give them to me, but I do want them. He wanted that. He wants to avenge that brutal spinning back kick knockout loss to Uriah Hall, and he wants that legendary fight with Anderson Silva. But now he gets Uriah Hall first and foremost, November 19th. That fight was spectacular the first time. It was Mousasi dominating the first round with his takedowns and giving Uriah Hall no room on the ground. Just absolutely one-sided performance. And then second round comes out, couple jabs, and then Uriah Hall sets it up. The spinning back kick from nowhere that clocks Gegard Mousasi. Mousasi goes tumbling, gets hit by a flying knee, and that's it. That was Uriah Hall's most spectacular win. Since then, though, Mousasi's turned his career around, beating 3 straight guys, Thales Leites, Thiago Santos, and most recently Vitor Belfort. And Uriah Hall has fallen off considerably, losing to Robert Whittaker and now Derek Brunson most recently. So now in a 5-round main event, I do expect Gegard Mousasi to win, especially this version of Mousasi. He always has the best game plans. He always knows whether to take guys down and dominate from them from there, or just to stand on the feet and take him out like that. Kind of did both against Thiago Santos. Takes him down, stands up, and then as Thiago Santos is standing up, an uppercut to the chin that knocks out Santos. Thales Leites, just a bunch of takedowns and dominating him throughout the fight. And against Vitor Belfort, stood with him, taunted him, and knocked him out in the second round. So Mousasi, he's now in the title picture at number 5 in the middleweight division, behind the far and away 4 best guys in the division: Yoel Romero, Chris Weidman, Jacare Souza, Luke Rockhold. But if there were some tiny rumors that Michael Bisping, that the UFC was trying to get Bisping on 206, and the only guy that would make sense is it's Gegard Mousasi, but now he's fighting Uriah Hall, so that's off the table. And this will put Mousasi's win streak to 4, not really do much as far as raising his stock. Those 4 guys in front of him are just absolute murderers. But if they do take too long to recover, maybe Mousasi gets the leapfrog and fights Bisping first. Maybe the timing will work out like that. Except that they're all fighting around the same time now. This is November 19th. I believe Rockhold and Souza's at the end of November. And, of course, Romero and Weidman November 12th in the Garden at UFC 205. So it's all in the same range. If Mousasi puts away Hall quickly, maybe go undamaged, and if those 2 other ones are dogfights, maybe Mousasi gets the first shot. Who knows? But I do think one of those guys, any of the 5, will be beating Bisping in the next title fight at middleweight. Bisping did have his run. Rockhold took him lightly, made some tactical errors, and I'm not short-selling Bisping at all. He was setting up that left hand perfectly. Rockhold was overcommitting to his punches. Bisping stepped to the left, got the right angle, and hit him with that left hand over the top twice. Just a brilliant performance from Bisping. and then he gets to defend his title in front of Manchester, live his dream, and get that win back against Stan Henderson. Fair and square, by the way. Scored that 48-47. Bisping, 49-46 maybe, if you give the 5th round to Bisping. But yeah, I don't see him holding the title for long, unfortunately. But what a spectacular run he's had. He's the best he's ever been, beating Anderson Silva, Talis Leites, winning the title, and now defending it against Stan Henderson. But yeah, he's got this murderer's row just waiting in the wings, seeing who will emerge as the top contender. But most wins of UFC history. So, most wins in UFC history and a middleweight belt to show his kids. Definitely, you could say that's a Hall of Fame career. He's been in the UFC forever. I don't remember when the last time Bisping was pulled out of a fight. He's fought around 30 times in the octagon since joining back in the day. I think Ultimate Fighter 2 or one of the early Ultimate Fighters was where Bisping entered the octagon. But now back to Mousasi and Hall, the main event of UFC Belfast. As I said, I do expect Mousasi to either take down Hall for 5 rounds or just jab away for 5 rounds. Hall just can't, he just hasn't been able to get it going recently. Tough fight against Robert Whittaker. Tougher fight against Derek Brunson. And now he gets one of the best at middleweight in Gegard Mousasi. But I do like how the middleweight division is all of a sudden woken up. It was stagnant for a while. There were no top fights going on. Now we have everything happening in November. Robert Whittaker versus Derek Brunson, which is a fantastic fight. Same night as, I think it's the co-main event of Jacare Souza versus Luke Rockhold. Weidman and Romero, now Mousasi and Hall. Everything is starting to move for the middleweight division, which is great. I do love that Brunson versus Whittaker fight. That's the 2 best prospects in the division. And yeah, I think everyone in the top 10, pretty much everyone in the top 10 has a fight scheduled, except for Anderson Silva. So we'll see what happens with him. But yeah, other than that, other than the champion and Anderson, everyone is scheduled for a fight, at least on my top 10. I have Tim Kennedy at 10 now since, Vitor Belfort got knocked out. Yeah, maybe Tim Kennedy re-enters the middleweight title contention picture. He's fighting Rashad Evans at UFC 205. Interesting fight. Evans is dropping down to 185, cutting sugar out of the diet and cutting that extra weight from 205 pounds. And now Tim Kennedy, after 2 years off from military service and other things, other obligations, he's back. One of the better fighters at middleweight. Of course, had that really controversial fight against Yoel Romero where he rocked. Romero revealed that Kennedy was grabbing the glove while he was landing those shots. And then Romero sits on the stool for too long. It was either the corner or the referee. They couldn't really get the situation figured out. So Romero was saved by the bell. Then he got extra time on the stool. He comes out and knocks out Tim Kennedy in the 3rd round. So, controversial fight there. Tim Kennedy can hang around the best. He already has a win over Michael Bisping, a dominant victory. And now he's back. UFC 205 on the prelims. Also, UFC Belfast. Kyoji Horiguchi and Ali Bagautinov was moved from UFC Manila after that card got canceled. And Bagautinov versus Horiguchi was expected to be one of the first fights of the night, which was just confusing. They're 2 of the best flyweights in the world. And it's still on the prelims. They move it to another card. It's still on the prelims. It is a Fight Pass card, though, so there isn't really a huge difference between main card and prelims on Fight Pass. But still, main card looks like Artem Lobov versus Teruto Ishihara, which is a hilarious fight. As far as, let's see, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is as far as fan favorites go. Lobov, of course, is like 12-1 with one no contest in his career. Ishihara, unabashedly doing this for the woman, the Japanese stud, training at Team Alpha Male now. He's coming off a knockout in his last 2 fights. And now he fights the always heavy-handed McGregor teammate Artem Lobov, the Russian Hammer. Also on the main card, Timothy Johnson versus Alexei Volkov, or I believe that's his first name, former Bellator champion. A lot of hype surrounding him. Timothy Johnson's a grinder, so it's a good test in his UFC debut. And the co-main event, Ross Pearson versus James Krause. Got to have that Brit on the main card. Ross Pearson has that UK crowd, Northern Ireland, so makes sense from a promotional standpoint. But I do believe that Bagautinov and Horiguchi deserve some respect. Those are 2 of the best guys at flyweight. I mean, Neil Seery versus Ian McCall, which is another flyweight fight, that's ahead of Bagautinov versus Horiguchi. And this is the retirement fight for Neil Seery, but I guess he does have that home crowd flavor. He's from Ireland, fights in Northern Ireland. So I guess that makes sense. Still, respect those flyweights. Want more main card slots from them. And yeah, the UFC can say like the flyweights don't get a lot of love because it's because the UFC doesn't give them a chance. Situations like this where top 5, top 10 flyweights are buried on the undercard. Saw that at UFC Brasilia where Jussier Formiga and Dustin Ortiz, and again a matchup of 2 top 10 flyweights, they were buried on the undercard. But hopefully this new season of The Ultimate Fighter signals a change in that they focus on the flyweights this year, and maybe, just maybe, more main card slots ahead. I mean, we did see Brandon Moreno and Luis Smolka on the main card at UFC Portland. And I think that Pettis versus Smolka was the original co-main event before Sergio Pettis got injured. I think that's the case. Don't quote me on it, though. Don't quote me. Also, Antonio Bigfoot Silva, no longer with the UFC. The UFC has parted ways with him. Rightfully so. He is 1-6-1 since his title shot against Cain Velasquez. That includes the title shot against Cain Velasquez. 1-6-1 since one of the biggest wins of his career, the knockout against Alistair Overeem, which no one saw coming. Yeah, it's just been a rough go. All 6 of those losses since then have been by knockout, and that was 2013. So getting knocked out 6 times since 2013 definitely not going to do you any good. And also the one draw was just a slobber knocker for 5 rounds against Mark Hunt, and that's going to do no good for your head too. So yeah, Bigfoot's taking a lot of damage. I do like the bearded look though. That was cool to give himself a makeover. But yeah, just got knocked out against Roy Nelson, I believe last month. September, yes. September 24th, UFC Brasilia. Before that, getting knocked out against Stefan Struve, and I think Before then was Mark Hunt's quick knockout. And then before that was his win against Soa Palele, the last win of Antonio Silva's career. He does have a win against Fyodor Emelianenko, win against Alistair Overeem, did get a title shot in the UFC. Also beat Travis Brown. So he's got some good wins on his record, just really Cain Velasquez beat the career out of him, you could say. Ever since that brutal TKO, Antonio Silva's never been the same. So he is one of the few guys, though, that actually needed TRT. It was said that, said by his coaches that he actually lactated at times. So, yeah, definitely could use some testosterone if that's the case. Other guys were abusing it just as an excuse to kind of take steroids. Not Antonio Silva, though. I think it was actually medically necessary for him to take TRT, and you could see the effects it had on him. Also, another bad news, Alexander Gustafsson out indefinitely. He's had back issues for a while now, and he was supposed to be the main event against Antonio Rogério Nogueira in UFC Sao Paulo. That's either happening next month or December. Can't exactly put my finger on it. And he's coming off that victory against Jan Blachowicz, which ended about a year layoff. And the coach just said that he wanted to get back in the octagon immediately just to take advantage of this healthy stage or run in his career, because he does have a lot of back issues. Apparently this is really the first time it's been revealed. He did pull out of one fight with a back injury. Now he does it again, and this time the manager says that he's going to be out, and we don't know when he's coming back. Yeah, that's really unfortunate. He gave each title holder, whether you consider Daniel Cormier or John Jones the real light heavyweight champion, he gave each of those guys a run for their money, and almost beat both of them in 5-round wars. Really always stepped up in title fights, and one of the best guys at light heavyweight, which is an incredibly weak division, and it's only getting weaker with the loss of Alexander Gustafsson. So hopefully he'll be back next year for another fight. It was good to see him back in the octagon against Jan Blachowicz. He was a little rusty, though. He used his takedowns to get the win. Jan was looking good on the feet with his combinations. But Gustafsson, well-rounded, took down Jones. I believe he took down Cormier as well. Very surprised. You don't expect that. You don't expect guys like the caliber of Cormier and Jones to get taken down by a guy who's primarily a striker. But, hey, he did it. Sweden's hero, Alexander Gustafsson, out indefinitely. But the new co-main event for that card, new main event, I should say, first off, Ryan Bader versus Little Nog. That's a rematch. Back at UFC 119, I believe Bader wrestled him for 3 rounds and got the win. So now it's a 5-round fight. We'll see what happens there. But co-main event, Thomas Almeida versus Alberto Morales. Interesting co-main event. They're giving Morales a huge step up after his UFC debut victory, which was on short notice, too. So he goes from a short notice debut victory against Alejandro Perez to fighting a guy who was considered at one point the best prospect at bantamweight. It's going to be a war, though. Morales showed that he does love to bang in his UFC debut, and that's the name of Thomas Almeida's game. He'll take shots, but he'll give harder ones. And That kind of spelled his demise against Cody Garbrandt. But against Albert Morales, we'll see if he can take those shots. Yeah, Almeida, he's a brawler through and through. He doesn't have the best defense. He's been hit clean in pretty much all his UFC fights. Knocked down twice against Brad Pickett. Rocked against Anthony Burchak. And his first fight, the name is escaping me. That guy's no longer in the UFC, but that was 3 rounds of just trading shots. And then he eventually ran into Cody Garbrandt. And Garbrandt has the power to put anybody to sleep at bantamweight. And that he did catch Almeida cleanly. So now he fights Alberto Morales, who's more than willing to brawl. That's going to be a really fun co-main event before a main event that does not look that exciting on paper. Speaking of Cody Garbrandt, the last guy to beat Thomas Almeida back in May, he is getting the next title shot at bantamweight. It's in the works, according to Ariel Helwani, not official yet, but it is close to being done. UFC 207, the Ronda Rousey card, December 30th. Yeah, Cody Garbrandt's getting the title shot off of the victory against Takeya Mizugaki, which is how Dominic Cruz got his title shot. So I guess Cody Garbrandt had that leverage. This is obviously a promotional first choice for title shot. You have TJ Dillashaw waiting for his rematch, and if we're going off merit, you give it to the guy who used to hold the belt and gave the champ a run for his money already. Well, I mean, Cruz took the belt from Dillashaw, but Dillashaw gave him a hard fight and won on some scorecards. Not on mine. I had Cruz winning. But, yeah, Dillashaw was a very good champion. 2 title defenses against Renan Barão and Joe Soto. It's unfortunate they couldn't get new blood. They scheduled that Renan Barão rematch a lot. Barão pulled out of the first one day of, or the day before, really, after a bad weight cut, and then Joe Soto steps up on 1 day's notice. Gave Dillashaw a hard fight, but got knocked out in the 5th, I believe. And then Barão comes in. He gets knocked out fairly quickly. And then Dillashaw loses his title to Cruz and beats Rafael Sunsao at UFC 200, avenges that loss, and solidified himself as the top contender at bantamweight. But Cody Garbrandt, he's been getting a push from the UFC. He headlined the FS1 card against Thomas Almeida, and he headlined the FS1 prelims of UFC 202, which was a huge event for the UFC. So they obviously see a future star in Cody Garbrandt. But can he beat Dominic Cruz? The name of his game is power. He's got very clean boxing technique, but his MO is to put you to sleep. And Dominic Cruz is the hardest guy to hit in MMA. Always slipping, always moving, always shuffling. He's never given you a good angle. So it's going to be really, really difficult for Cody Garbrandt to catch him. He has 25 minutes to do so, though, so we'll see what happens. It's going to be a very interesting fight. I have Dominic Cruz. I can't ever pick against him. He's my favorite fighter to watch offensively and defensively. It's just so mesmerizing how his head movement, his footwork it's just beautiful. Everything. Also at UFC 207, Cain Velasquez and Fabricio Verdum will have their rematch. It's at sea level this time. It was a big issue last time, how Cain Velasquez could not handle the elevation of Mexico City. Gassed out very, very quickly. He's known for his excellent cardio, but really, he couldn't handle Mexico City. Decided not to move out there like Verdum did a couple weeks out. And it paid dividends. Verdum took him out with relative ease. So, yeah, that they're the two best contenders at heavyweight since that first match at UFC 180. 188? Yeah, 188. Yeah, 180 was Mark Hunt. That's when Fabricio Verdum got the interim title, and then 188 is when he fought Cain Velasquez. Since then, Velasquez got hurt. They were supposed to fight again at UFC 196. That got turned into UFC Pittsburgh, a fight night event, headlined by Johnny Hendricks and Stephen Thompson. And so the Fabricio Verdum, he ended up fighting Travis Brown at UFC 203 pretty recently, and just dominated him for 3 rounds again. Not really dominated. Travis Brown, I think, won a round on some scorecards. It wasn't as like really viciously one-sided as the first fight was. And Cain Velasquez just absolutely annihilated Travis Brown at UFC 200. So they have a common opponent since then. And of course, Verdum was knocked out by Stipe Miocic. That's the important part. And lost his title, UFC 198. So now that's an interesting matchup. We'll see, hopefully, a Cain on top of his game this time with cardio, because Fabricio Verdum has not looked that impressive recently. It was a very iffy performance against Brown. You could tell he wasn't as aggressive as he was in that first fight when he didn't have the title. Now he's on his way back, and he might have lost the hunger. I don't know. Maybe I'm just speculating. I don't know. But Cain Velasquez wants that belt back. That he was known as the baddest man on earth, 2-time champion. Wants it for a third. So winner of this certainly gets the next shot at Stipe Miocic, who's taking a break after that very tough fight against Alistair Overeem. Other fights announced for UFC 207. Matt Brown, Tarek Safdien, awesome fight. Brown's aggressive. Tarek Safdien's conservative, but Safdien can kick your leg off if you're not careful, so that's going to be a really fun fight. Tim Means versus Alex Oliveira. Oliveira, after failing to make weight at UFC Portland by 5 pounds, he moves back up to welterweight, where he should stay. I mean, he's big there. Just stay there. Don't try lightweight again. Tim Means, of course, one of the best clinch artists in the UFC. His striking is just top-notch, up close. He just excels at phone booth fighting, as they say. And Oliveira likes to push guys up against the fence, so his game kind of plays into Means' game. That's going to be really interesting to see how that goes down. Sabah Homasi, back after his UFC debut, lost to Tim Means. He's fighting Brendan Thatch, who is on his last go. He has 3 straight losses, all by submission. Homasi, as we saw in his first fight, can take guys down. And if he does, we'll see if he can submit Brandon Thatch. He was really hyped up. 2 straight knockouts to start his UFC career, then 3 straight submission losses. Shame. He's got very, very good striking. Just can't put that ground game together. And probably the most interesting matchup announced for UFC 207, Neil Magny versus Johnny Hendricks. Johnny Hendricks will retire with a loss here. He's looked much different since losing the title. Had that brutal fight against Stephen Thompson that wasn't even close. And then, again, not even close against Kelvin Gastelum at UFC 200. So this is Hendricks' last chance. We'll see if he does go back to his wrestling here. Magny's a tough guy. He fought off the wrestling of Kelvin Gastelum. But Gaslam's not a Division I All-American like Johnny Hendricks is. But Hendricks has fallen in love with that right hand. And, yeah, hopefully we'll see who gets the win. They're both coming off losses. Manny was just severely outperformed by Lorenz Larkin at UFC 202. And, of course, Johnny Hendricks, 2 straight losses, will retire after this one if he loses. Interesting matchup. We'll see if Manny can do what Gastelum really did and just batter him with long punches for 15 minutes. UFC Sacramento also filling up. That's on December 17th. About 13 days before the New Year's Eve card, which is on the Friday, I believe. That. Yeah, they don't want to compete with New Year's, which is smart. Everyone's going to be watching the whole countdown thing. Uriah Faber versus Brad Pickett. This card would not have been complete without Sacramento's own Uriah Faber, their best fighter to name. And Brad Pickett's on the edge of retirement. He got dominated by Yuri Alcantara in his last contest at UFC 204. And Uriah Faber is kind of at the end of his rope as well. Got dominated by Dominic Cruz, and then he got dominated again by Jimmy Rivera. So you can tell he's at the end of the road as well. I think the loser will let's try this again. The loser will retire, in my opinion. And I think Brad Pickett already announced that this is his last fight. So win or loss, I think Brad Pickett is done. I might be mixing up Brad Pickett with Neil Seery. My apologies if I did. Mike Perry, he's back after knocking out Danny Roberts against Alan Jouban, the male model of the UFC. Interesting fight there. Mike Perry has brutal power. Hung Yu Lim tasted it. Danny Roberts tasted it. And Alan Jouban, we'll see if he tastes it. Mike Perry already tweeted at Jouban saying, "I'm going to mess up your pretty little face, boy." And that's hilarious. Mike Perry's trash talk is always fun to listen to. Jouban loves to stand and bang with guys, and I don't know if that's going to be the best strategy against Mike Perry. You would think a male model wants to protect his face, protect his career, but Jouban kind of does the opposite in the octagon. He loves to trade punches. Coming off that amazing fight of the night victory against Bilal Muhammad in July. And it's going to be a fun fight. I can't see anything else being fight of the night. Alan Jouban is always a candidate for fight of the night. Just the way he pushes the pace and brings the fight to opponents. Mike Perry is certainly going to oblige. So that's going to be a great contest on that card. And Colby Covington versus Brian Barberena. Barberena is known as a prospect killer. He beat both Rory Alves and Sage Northcutt in his last 2 fights. The Warley Alves fight was just stunning. Alves was undefeated at that point and looked unbeatable as far as prospects go. But Barberena brought the fight to him, pressured him, and did not let him breathe. Forced him up against the cage with punches, really. He didn't really use the clinch at all. He just used ring-cutting techniques and did not give Warley Alves any space. And, yeah, Barberena got the 3-round decision. So excellent stuff from him. And Colby Covington, of course, another All-American wrestler in the UFC. And nobody can stop his takedowns. But Warley Alves did it with a guillotine. So we'll see if Barberena can do that as well. We have seen Barberena's skill on the ground. He trains at MMA Lab with John Crouch. Great camp there. Ben Henderson also. and he is staying at welterweight now. He used to fight at lightweight in the beginning of his UFC career. Fought Sage Northcutt at welterweight. Now he's staying. Fought Warley Alves at welterweight, and now Colby Covington. Covington's coming off of 2 brutal victories against UFC newcomers Max Griffin and Jonathan Munier. TKO'd them both. Well, actually, I think he submitted Munier, but stopped both of them. Not the best stand-up, but once he gets you to the ground, good luck getting up. That's that college wrestling for you. I cannot picture seeing Brian Barberena win this fight, but that's just me. UFC Albany the day before UFC 206. Interesting that they chose this one to do the 2 straight event thing. They should do that with their bigger cards, and there's 2 huge cards on either end of UFC 206, and they choose UFC 206. That's the one that gets the 2 straight events. Interesting choice, but UFC Albany, an interesting card with Derek Lewis and Shamil Abdurakhimov in the main event. Recently added Mark Diakese versus Frankie Perez. Perez is out of retirement now, and Diakese coming off that awesome victory against Lucas Sayuski at UFC 204 in his UFC debut. He's got brutal power, and Frankie Perez is a very well-rounded fighter, so we'll see how that fight goes. He trains in New Jersey with those guys, Frankie Edgar, Edson Barboza, Eddie Alvarez. Great camp there. Andrew Sanchez, the Ultimate Fighter winner, most recent one, light heavyweight grappler. Now he's moving down to middleweight to fight Travis Smith. That's going to be a grapple fest. And Charlie Ward, McGregor's buddy, making his UFC debut at just 3-1 against Randy Brown. You can see how much pull McGregor has in the UFC. Getting a guy with just a 3-1 record into the octagon. Interesting stuff. So that's that. Next week, same time, Sunday, 7 a.m., vicradio.org. Tune in for another edition of Shadowboxing. Up next on VIC Radio is Ropes and Borders. You've been listening to Shadowboxing here on vicradio.org.